Raf Simons, a Belgian-born fashion designer, has had the type of fashion career that many people can only dream of. With spells at Jil Sander, Christian Dior, Calvin Klein and now Prada, Raf Simons' design language can be felt across the fashion industry. However, I'm not here to talk about his whole career in this video. In this video, we are looking at his work at Calvin Klein, or as it is otherwise known, CK205 W39 NYC. Raf Simons' debut collection for Calvin Klein took place in New York in front of an eager crowd, salivating to see what his vision for the brand would look like. Longtime Raf Simons collaborator and American artist Sterling Ruby was commissioned to transform the runway show space into an art installation, filling the room with an American mood. Mops, buckets and fabrics hung from the ceiling. The show, titled Parade, highlighted all the different American archetypes. It set the tone for Raf Simons' vision at Calvin Klein, which would be inspired by an outsider's perspective of American life. Raf Simons is reinterpreting American style in his own way, while reminding you it's not to be taken literally. This collection in particular, to quote Raf directly, was inspired by American youth. The American references were glaring from the first look, with Western-inspired shirts paired with metal-tipped cowboy boots. Only this time, this cowboy is an absolute fashionista. There was clothing for men and women, with the American ideas developed into business suits that resembled the aesthetic of Wall Street cliques when they opt for lighter shades. Sheriff's jackets brought a police aspect to the collection, and there were athletic stripes on the side of trousers, a reference to the sports craze that we see in America. Men's Parker jackets also had American quilted interiors. As a reference to infamous American plastic couch covers, this collection was literally littered with plastic, from heels to coats and dresses, all wrapped in plastic. I must say, the knitwear in this collection was absolutely fantastic, with, you know, the rip pieces on the sleeves and on the skirts. I really love the knitwear in this collection. And of course, we mainly know Calvin Klein for denim and underwear, and in this collection we saw a lot of denim. There were a lot of denim pieces which Calvin Klein has come to be known for. The aesthetic of the denim did look very much Helmut Lang, but I'm very sure that Raf Simons was inspired by Helmut Lang, and of course, there's that intersection of Helmut Lang with Calvin Klein, which makes a lot of sense historically. Literally, every time I think of Calvin Klein and denim and underwear, I think of, you know, those cringy Calvin Klein adverts. It's like, my Calvins. All those adverts, I just find them really hilarious. To quote Raf Simons on his thoughts about his debut collection, he said, "I keep thinking of all the beauty here. You have to focus on that now. And I think American youth is the future for this country. It's about gathering. It's intelligent, honest, powerful, beautiful. It sounds almost simplistic, maybe." All in all, there was a good response to this collection. It was a complete 180 from what we expected. Raf Simons' aesthetic, which has strangely sometimes been described as minimalist, which confuses me. Maybe because of his stint at Jil Sander, I don't know. But it gave us a bright and bold mix of colours at Calvin Klein, which is a brand that historically has an incredibly monotonous tone. The Spring-Summer 18 collection was a continuation of Raf Simons' examination of American society. Andy Warhol's pop art juices were flowing all over the runway, with prints of Dennis Hopper from critically acclaimed 1969 movie Easy Rider, and a 1971 portrait of Sandra Brandt. The Andy Warhol prints were from his series titled Death and Disaster, a series that he started in 1962. It's a collection of more than 70 artworks, with their subjects mainly being suicides, car accidents, tainted cans of tuna fish, and electric chairs. The series contains images with only one hue of colour, or repetition of the same photograph with or without colour, which makes a lot of sense. If you want to talk about American culture, and you want to make a Calvin Klein that is inspired by different aspects of America, pop art is something that inherently is very, very big in America historically. Andy Warhol was definitely at the forefront of pop art. Continuing with the Hollywood references, Raf did not shy away from the shocking, referencing a scene of Mary Elizabeth in her role as Carrie White in the 1976 American horror movie Carrie, based on Stephen King's 1974 horror novel that bears the same name. This is a movie that is cemented as an iconic motion picture referenced all across entertainment, including movies and music videos by the industry's biggest names. You might not have realized, but if you watch Rihanna's Bitch Better Have My Money, the art director, whoever directed that, definitely referenced Carrie White in the way that the music video was sort of made and the way it was, the scenes came about. In this collection, similar to the last collection, Sterling Ruby created some more objects to hang off the ceiling that put us right in the middle of a horror movie set with axes, buckets, pom-poms and banners. These Sterling Ruby pom-poms were also held by the models in the collection. With this collection, Ras Simmons wanted to embrace the risk that we saw Hollywood directors taking with their film projects versus fashion, where he said in an interview is riddled by rigid expectations of spectators and critics. And this is a point that I think is really, really true. Nowadays, because fashion is so commercial and everyone wants to appease the critics because that determines a lot of the time how much your stuff will sell, a lot of brands are riddled by the critics and the spectators and the consumers, and that's why fashion has gotten so commercial, because people want to sell. And who are the people that you have to appease to when you want something to do well commercially? It's the critics, it's the consumers. And so he is very into the American movies that were very, very experimental and, you know, went against what was expected of them. And that's sort of what he wants to bring across in his Calvin Klein collections. It's not what you expect from Calvin Klein, but it's still Calvin Klein. It's a very interesting proposition. The moral of the story was that Ras Simmons was taking a few risks at a brand that is very commercial and trying to spice things up. Other American takes have been continued from the previous collection, including Western shirts and American quilts. We also saw pointier iterations of cowboy boots than the ones from the previous collection. The show ended with the ultimate American trope, a human-sized cheerleading pom-pom. Ras Simmons' Calvin Klein this season was gory, but it also had humour. The Ras Simmons American book is continuing to be written, and this was the second chapter. It's the third Ras Simmons collection at Calvin Klein, and the set looks completely different to the first two runway shows. The brand took over the American Stock Exchange building and transformed it into a farm that reminds you of the American Midwest, but with a Hollywood popcorn twist. And of course, as I'm sure you guessed, the objects hanging on the scaffolding were designed by none other than Sterling Ruby. The artwork on the barns are the same pieces of art from the previous collection by Andy Warhol. Clearly, there is a continuation from the previous body of work in every instance. Lights, camera, action. Ras Simmons is not out of his Hollywood spirit just yet, so all the guests can have their shoes drenched in popcorn for good measure. However, the main inspiration of this collection didn't actually come from the glitz and glam of motion picture. But don't be fooled, some of these elements still remained. Focused on safety and protection and the theme of hope, heavy-duty fireman jackets initiated the show, paired with knitted balaclavas. And this was kind of a full circle moment because balaclavas that are knitted in this specific way is something that is very big in fashion right now, and it's sort of a fashion trend everywhere you go. Instagram, TikTok, everyone is knitting balaclavas. The full set was present in this collection with many looks including fireman gloves and a thigh-high rubber hazmat boot with fireman stripes. I mean, at least you can look fashionable pretending to be a firefighter or someone that's going into a nuclear plant. However, do not actually wear these pieces and think you're going to save someone in the fire. Obviously, it's made for fashion.
You're a donut! You're so stupid! You're so stupid! You're stupid! Dumb!
The performance of these garments should be held in big question. So let's not get carried away and do very silly things, because your Calvin Klein hazmat boots are definitely melting in a real fire. Let's be frank. To quote Ras Simmons on his inclusion of fireman jackets, he said, "I wanted the show to be about heroes, all kinds of heroes." And it's interesting because when you think of heroes, you either think all the way to the extreme when you talk about superheroes, Superman, Batman, those kind of things, or you think of, you know, the military. The military and soldiers are very respected, like, oh, we thank you for your service kind of thing in America. There's a big military culture in America. But when you think about it, firemen are some of the biggest heroes we have in society. They're literally saving lives on a daily basis. Firefighters are also something fundamentally that people can agree with, because when you think of the military and soldiers obviously that brings in politics, and people have different political views. There are people that don't think war under any circumstances necessary in any way, and just the violence that is created by war and soldiers and things like that. And so fundamentally, more people can agree with firefighters being, our public heroes, as opposed to things like the military. An open back shiny silver dress with lace trim appeared alongside other looks with sets of gloves. This was a direct reference to thermal blankets usually used in emergencies to reduce heat loss in a person's body caused by thermal radiation, water evaporation, and convection. However, remember how I said there was still an element of Hollywood in this collection? Well, look no further than Safe, a 1995 psychological drama film written and directed by Todd Haynes. It follows a suburban housewife in Los Angeles whose life is abruptly changed when she becomes sick with a mysterious illness caused by the environment around her. This could also be why the gloves in the collection were very heavy duty and chunky. Knitted vests also had the shape of body plate armor. Just this time they won't slow you down on your stroll towards your Mercedes, like the metal versions used by the Roman Empire would. Probably the most obvious references that were really clear were the Looney Tunes references, including Coyote and Roadrunner making the cut in the form of knitwear. Another thing that America is known for, in America, they've historically been known to make some of the most famous cartoons. Western shirts made an appearance for the 3rd season in a row, but it was met with no complaints, in addition to the patchwork and quilting that have been features in both previous collections. Raf Simons' outsider view on the American landscape continued to progress with each collection. The next collection, Resort 2019, was very commercial in nature, which comes as no surprise. Resort collections have always been commercial in nature. This collection featured multiple collegiate sports references in every aspect of the collection. College culture in America is huge, and it has built a reputation of having some of the greatest academic institutions in the world. People travel from all over the world to go to college in the US. In this collection, we see logos and prints of 2 top 50 schools in the world, Yale and UC Berkeley. And for those that aren't aware, UC stands for University of California. Varsity jackets, knitwear, skirts, dresses, and more were printed with logos from both universities. The sports references came in the form of basketball and American football inspired accessories, including tote bags, heels, and handbags. This is very interesting, as football and basketball are 2 of the most popular American sports besides baseball, and they are the most popular American collegiate sports. As Raf Simons so regularly did during his time at Calvin Klein, it's a European point of view on what American culture is. These are obvious references to make, as there is a huge sports craze in the US. The Super Bowl is one of the biggest sports spectacles in the world. Think of March Madness in college basketball. So the fact that he used their actual logos as prints on garments made perfect sense. The crests of Yale and UC Berkeley were embroidered on the breast pockets of collegiate striped blazers. Also consider that Yale and UC Berkeley are D1 schools that attract elite scholarship athletes every year. You can also make a case for Raf Simons choosing to use University of California, being that the shortened version of California's logo, Cal, is something that could also stand for Calvin Klein. In a Vogue runway review, they made a really good point that in fashion in general, there has been a lot of co-branding between sportswear and high fashion brands. This was around the time when Gucci had just launched their pieces that they made in collaboration with the New York Yankees, for example. In this collection, it was also important to look closer at some of the garment details. There were jackets with buttons, which were specific references to different American states, including a jacket that referenced tourist souvenirs. Some very familiar items made a comeback. This season, the firefighter jackets came in bright colours, and a return of denim with firefighter safety stripes, quilted fabrics, the athletic stripes on trousers, and many more aspects remained. And of course, the cowboy boots were not going anywhere. But this time, they were rightfully accompanied by Western hats. This was the collection with the most obvious references, but maybe this commercial collection was needed to introduce the everyday audience to what Raf Simons' Calvin Klein was supposed to be. For Spring/Summer 2019, Raf's Calvin Klein references took us back into the world of Hollywood with a heavily Jaws-inspired collection. Jaws is a 1975 American thriller film directed by Steven Spielberg, based on the 1974 novel by Peter Benchley. In the film, a man-eating great white shark attacks beachgoers at a summer resort town, prompting a police chief to hunt it with the help of a marine biologist and a professional shark hunter. This is one of the most significant American movies for a reason. It was the first American movie to gross over $100 million, and this is the movie that popularized the term blockbuster, because people would literally line up to watch the movie across street blocks all around the world. The set of the show puts you right within the waters of the Jaws movie. Just beware, a shark could come out of anywhere. The floor was also in a striking shade of red, a reference of the blood of the Jaws victim. The show opened with a pixelated scene of Chrissy Watkins swimming through the water, which is a shame. As part of the set, there were a number of floor-to-ceiling screens which played the memorable scene. Chrissy Watkins was a character from the movie who went skinny dipping, never to make it out of the water after being attacked by the great white shark. In an interview with Vogue, Ras Simmons described why he chose Jaws as one of the reference points for this collection. He said, "These are very important movies in my memory. Disasters happen, but they turn again into beauty, and beauty is around us and it can oftentimes turn into disaster." From the get-go, the Jaws references were shoved in your face with vests and t-shirts printed with a famous Jaws poster and stamped with a CK logo. An oceanographer in the Jaws movie, Matt Hooper, had his beanie placed in Calvin Klein history with a look paired with a scuba diving suit. Models had their hair tips wet to go along with the theme of the collection. However, I would have actually preferred if their hair was completely wet, if they were going to go all out on the Jaws references, rather than just wet tips of the hair. Not even a Jaws shark collection is going to keep cowboy boots away from a Ras Simmons Calvin Klein collection. So of course, that was something we once again saw in this collection. It wouldn't be a Raf Calvin Klein collection if there was no focus on the details. Footwear, accessories and trousers were given a shark skin effect, plus torn pleated skirts reminded you of a shark attack. However, in reality, you'd be lucky if it was only your skirt ripped if you were attacked by Jaws. However, Jaws was not the only movie reference in this collection, despite the blatant references, whether it was in the garments or in the set of the show. The Graduate, a movie that Ras Simmons said had had a huge impact on him, was intelligently fused into the framework of this collection. The 1967 movie, based on Charles Webb's 1963 novel, tells the story of Benjamin Braddock, who had just graduated from college but had no plans for his future, and ended up loving a dissatisfied housewife, Mrs. Robinson, before eventually falling in love with her Ivy League student daughter, Elaine. It's a story in which a disillusioned college graduate finds himself torn between his older lover and her daughter. Mortarboard and graduation gowns were the obvious references to the film, but there were also nods to Anne Bancroft's character, Mrs. Robinson. Features of her personal style were included in this collection, including sexy cocktail dresses, a lot of leopard prints, and fancy brooches. To provide deeper context as to why Ras Simmons wanted to reference The Graduate, to quote him directly, he said, "This collection explores taboos and temptations, shifts in culture and community, but ultimately, the overarching theme is love." While it's easy to look at this collection and see scuba suits everywhere, and see it as a reference to the Jaws movie, it's actually a reference to both movies. In The Graduate, there is a scene in which Benjamin Braddock wears a scuba diving suit at a family pool party that was bought for him as a 21st birthday present. In Jaws, Matt Hooper wore a scuba suit to confront the shark in a cage scene. The scuba diving wetsuits came in multiple forms, from full body creations to ones that were partially rolled over to showcase the floral leopard print and other colourful prints on the inner lining. Ras Simmons America this season took us to the ocean, gave us a story of romance, and created a sense of intrigue, still creating the design language of Calvin Klein one collection at a time. Since Ras Simmons started at Calvin Klein, Ras Simmons has referenced multiple American themes in his collection, but the theme he left out the most was looking within to the Calvin Klein archives. In this collection, he looked in the minimalism of the 70s that led to the brand becoming a fashion powerhouse. Hence, it describes the commercial nature of this collection. We saw two-tone denim, ruched dresses, trench coats, knitted tops and skirts. Asymmetric polo shirts were just as much ponchos as they were actual shirts, shearling coats, and hourglass blazers that channeled a little bit of Balenciaga energy. As always, details from past collections could be seen across the range, including firefighter safety stripes on trousers and cowboy boots. The brand also launched a new sneaker offering called the Shift Sneaker. It combined a retro style fabric upper with a magma melted sole, as the brand described it. However, don't let the inspiration points fool you. The biggest reason for the real commercial nature of this collection was a change in direction after a report from the parent company, PVH, reported terrible financial performance for Q3, with the CEO at the time promising more commercial products. To quote the CEO in 2019, he said, "We will cut back on a number of these planned investments in the 205 collection business, and as we move forward, we will be taking a more commercial approach to this important business." He also added that Calvin Klein would shift the focus of its marketing campaigns from high fashion to more affordable items targeting a more mainstream audience. This was the brand's offering of a more palatable interpretation of America that customers can easily weld into the framework of their wardrobe. This would actually be Raf Simons' last collection with Calvin Klein, as amidst bad financial performance, Raf Simons and Calvin Klein would eventually part ways 8 months before his contract was set to end. And this led to a lot of conspiracy theories online. People like, what happened? Was there an internal fight? But actually, when you look at it historically, there were many reasons that led you towards this being inevitable. Closer to the end of Raf Simons' time at Calvin Klein, the CEO at the time was very open about how much he didn't like Raf Simons' Calvin Klein. He said it was too high fashion, it didn't appeal to a mass market audience, and he was clearly already sort of making changes. Now, looking at my notes, Raf Simons was appointed with a role that was called the Chief Creative Officer, which is more than a creative director. He was not only overseeing the creative aspects of Calvin Klein, he was overseeing the marketing and overseeing a lot of business aspects as well. So this was a very huge role. It was definitely bigger than the role that he had at Dior, bigger than the role that he had at Jil Sander prior. However, in recent months before Raf Simons actually parted ways with Calvin Klein, the company had begun to dial back on some of Raf Simons' responsibilities. And so in my notes here, I have that someone who used to work at L'Oreal, Marie Guilin Merle, so sorry if I pronounced that wrong, by the way. But anyway, she was appointed as Calvin Klein's new Chief Marketing Officer. And she didn't report to Raf Simons, but she reported to the brand's chief executive at the time, which was Steve Schiffman. So you can imagine, the CEO was outspoken about how he didn't like Raf Simons' Calvin Klein and it wasn't commercial enough and it was too high fashion. And then they reduced Raf Simons' role in a way by implementing new people to take parts of what Raf Simons' job was and making sure that they don't report to Raf Simons, but they report to the CEO. And so of course there was already tension before he left. So by the time he left, it wasn't really a surprising thing. All in all, I really did enjoy Raf Simons' time at Calvin Klein. I thought he gave us very good interpretations of American culture. I would have just loved if he used less obvious references, but then again, you can see two sides to it because Calvin Klein is a very commercial brand. So using very obvious American references kind of makes sense. But I would have liked to see, deeper references that could teach us more about American culture in ways that we didn't see it before, rather than looking at, obvious like The Graduate, Jaws, Andy Warhol. Like these are Sterling Ruby. It's just a bit too obvious. And by the time Raf Simons left, Calvin Klein ended up being in the outlet stores again, and you could buy Calvin Klein 205 under Raf Simons for crazy cheap prices, especially in stores like Barney's, which obviously has now closed down. And on that note, let me know what your thoughts are on Raf Simons' time at Calvin Klein. What were your favorite collections? What did you like and dislike about it? If you want to learn about how you can research fashion more effectively, I have an ebook on my website, which is on the effective ways to learn about fashion. I highly recommend it, and the link to that will be in the description below. And on that note, I'll be back with another video very soon. Thank you very much for watching.